А звучание, видите, как это?
И в темпе делал.
Да.
This is a portrait of Lincoln Kirstein, who was George Balanchine's partner in creating the School of American Ballet. That we have here at the school to highlight many of the really important people who have worked at the school over the past 76 years. In the center, you see George Balanchine and Lincoln Kirstein, and they're surrounded by teachers that Mr. Balanchine hired to teach at the school. Many of them were from Russia. When the school was founded in 1934, he brought over several notable Russian dancers that he had worked with back in St. Petersburg.
So you don't have to. Be careful, some of these have fallen because of the storm. And people come and leave vodka. And you see the eggs. Sometimes people leave toe shoes. Mr. Balanchine made my life. I came to the New York City Ballet as a secretary in 1953. I was 20. And I walked in the door and I knew I wanted to be there forever. And in 1963, he asked me to be his personal assistant. And I, of course, said yes. And I was with him until he died.
Oh, well, I met Mr. Balanchine in Ballet Russe, because I was first in Ballet Russe. And Mr. Balanchine left the company to go to American Ballet Theater. And Mr. Balanchine came in to replace him. And that's where I met him. I, used to go and sit and read during rehearsals. I mean, I was in the room, but when I wasn't dancing, I was always reading. So I was reading as usual, and all of a sudden there was silence. And I looked up, and everyone's looking at me. And Mr. Balanchine said, "Now that's concentration." So that's when he put me in Serenade. And that was the first time.
He came in, he's coming towards me, and I realized it was Mr. Balanchine, and I froze. And he came up to me and he said, "Play some more." And I shook my head and looked at the keys and I said, "I can't." And he said, "Please, go on." And I said, "I can't," Not quite 15 at that point, and very, very shy. And he was very kind. He said, "That's okay." And he walked out. And that's how I met Mr. Balanchin for the first time.
I danced with the company for just 5 years and then retired from dancing for a number of reasons and went to college. And Balanchin lured me back. It was his idea for me to be a teacher and a ballet master. So he really trained me in this. He started me out when I was very young and had very little experience. But he had used me when he was choreographing. So I was part of the creative process because he found that I learned quickly and understood musically. And that was helpful to him in rehearsal, so it was a great preparation.
I was 18, I did 7 day lessons for the Lenya, and he'd done it with her, with Allegra Kent in New York, 59 I think it was. She said to me, why don't you come to America? I said, how? He said, give me some photographs. She showed it to Balanchin. He happened to stage an opera in Hamburg or Nigen, and she made arrangement to meet him. I flew up to Hamburg to meet him. I was so nervous. Oh, and he took my leg and see how and then I get a week later from the company to join the company.
I knew him again in Chicago when they came, City Ballet came to do the Nutcracker there, and I was 9 years old. And Mr. Balanchin did not teach the children, but he rehearsed us after we learned the steps. And I had only had my teacher before Balanchin, my teacher in Chicago, who was a very strong woman and yelled a lot. And Mr. Balanchin came and was very quiet and very respectful of the children, of all of us, and moved us around quickly, but was so pleasant. And then I saw his ballet, which was the Nutcracker, which I was in. I saw this magical ballet, and that was it. I knew that I wanted to dance for Balanchin.
Yes, I was at the school when I was 10 and a half, and I did the Nutcracker, and then that year they did a production of the Nutcracker on television on a show called Playhouse 90, and Mr. B did Drosselmeyer. And our secretary, he had come and watched class, and he had picked some girls to be in the company that had just been apprentices in the Nutcracker, but grown-up parts. And everybody was congratulating everyone. Oh, congratulations, you're in the company. And I said to this girl, congratulations, you're in the company. And she said, congratulations, you're in the company. And I said, I'm in the company? I don't think I'm in the company. Oh, yes, you are. So I went back to the school and I spoke to Natasha Glebov, who was the secretary. And she said, oh, yes, Mr. Balanchin wants you to be in the company. And that was the first I'd heard about it. And it was really, and it was amazing, actually, so. Big surprise. That's how you found out things, you know. He watched that morning and then he decided.
He had big shoes on all the time, not ballet shoes, but big shoes. And he'd move a little bit, and because we all took class with him, we could all figure out what he was doing. Always very patient, and he choreographed very quickly.
Okay, how he divided the body was essential. That was, first of all, the weight on the balls of the feet. We were never settled back. We were always forward, ready to move. He would say, like the boxer in the ring, so, or the cat ready to pounce, so we could move instantaneously. We didn't have to transfer our weight and then go somewhere. So that's one thing. The other thing is how we divided the body. That front was directly in front of your center, so the most important position we had was fifth position. And when we tendued front, it was directly in front, or tendu back, right behind you, and side was directly to the side. Then how you move your feet out of fifth. That's why we did many, many tendu batmas.
And once I asked him a question in Prodigal Son when she does the beating, you know, I was with Mishra Baryshnikov, I danced it, and he said, don't ask questions, you find out yourself. See, he didn't, you find out yourself. He knew us better than we knew ourselves. That was amazing, you know?
It didn't matter if there were 20 people watching or nobody watching the rehearsal. It didn't matter to him. He just came in, worked, choreographed, was pleasant most of the time. Really, you know, yes, okay, well, now it's time for us to work. And you work, and then afterwards, we go have a bite to eat. There was nothing, sometimes in the US you say somebody thinks something's very precious. There was no preciousness.
Working with Balanchin was a good way to spoil you. In rehearsal, he had a quiet manner and the concentration of a cabinet maker, putting together a complicated piece of furniture. He knew what he wanted and could let you know in the simplest terms, either by verbal direction or, more often, by demonstrating. He was comfortably impersonal when he was working, yet at the same time keenly attentive.
The most important position we had was fifth position. And when we tendued front, it was directly in front, or tendu back, right behind you, and side was directly to the side. Then how you move your feet out of fifth. It's faster than going over there. When we step forward onto point, we'll be right on balance. If it's over there, we have to transfer our weight forward and over to the side, and the same to the back. The other way of picking up the foot is through coup de pied, shaping the toes around and the heel forward. So all that articulation. Another thing that's very Mr. B is how we descend. So you didn't just fall to the floor. You went through your toes, the knee, holding on with your thighs, calves, and feet to the floor, so it's a continual movement. Or picking up the leg. He said we should unfold the leg as if it had no bones. In other words, toes going back, lift the knee, unfold the leg, and put it down.
Really amazing how the standing foot, maybe not everyone is turned out, right? He made this one turn in bit, but this, the working leg, to show it, is turned out. And there's a real, the refinements.
I think he had been thinking of that ballet for a long time and playing the music. He played that music over and over and over. And I think he had the whole thing in his head when he started. To work with him was incredible. It was so quick. I mean, he would do this, and he would do this, and we would do it, and we'd go on to the next part. Before you knew it, he had the first movement of a ballet. Many, many different ways of doing a thing. Many different ways.
And always came back to number one.
Well, yeah, maybe he'd say, but he went to,
It'd drive you crazy.
He would do 5 or 6 versions. And he'd say, well, let's go back to 3.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 3. What was 3? I couldn't remember what was 3.
Then he'd get mad at you if you didn't remember.
Yeah, but he was a genius. I mean, what he ended up with was incredible.
By repeating them in class many, many times, your body memorizes sort of how to move, how to be. So when you actually finally get out on the stage, that technique is in your body, and you don't have to think about point my toe, put my heel forward, hold my hand. It's just there, and you can dance the music. God gave us 5 fingers. I want the thumb rounded and curved, the little finger out. And then that was like a basic position, like our 5th position, except we didn't stay there. We move, as the hand moves through the air, it's alive and it changes.
Oh, 1 and 2, single turn and down. Croisé, effacé, effacé, croisé, and 1. Plie, turn, and 8, croisé, and...
I mean, he had the most beautiful hands. And then one year, he had a house in Connecticut. And he came back from the weekend, and he had cut his finger in the lawnmower. And so it cut off the first digit of his forefinger. And he was so upset because his hands were, you know, part of the beauty. But, you know, then he would always gesture, and when people would imitate him, they would go like this, you know, like this. You know, I guess the stories are he used to, when he was a little boy, and watch the girls and how they did this. And nobody else really, that's a man, really knew how to teach that for women. Yes, he loved women and how beautiful they were, and there's a lot about the neck that he thought was so beautiful, this part of the neck. And open the chest and wear the diamond necklace.
Sometimes he'd take a dancer by the hand, or just above the elbow, or, more abstractedly, by the wrist. And I didn't realize at the time that that was the way the men hold the women in the marriage sequence in Firebird.
Yeah, right.
And that it is, I was told, a ritual that you hold the woman by the wrist.
That's interesting.
And so connected, begin to work out a complex series of movements.
He let them play the music and no dancing. The second one starts, and he takes her to center, and then they start dancing. I mean, and so minimal. He let people be aware of the sound. In the end, you know, there's a spotlight, and he kisses. You just see their hands. He kisses her hands, and he just goes down on his knees. You know, like he does have women. I mean, he was married to 5 ballerinas. You know.
We revered him. He was a god, part father, part friend, part lover, He filled all these masculine roles in our lives. We didn't care what anybody else thought. We didn't care about the audience. We didn't care about each other. We only cared what he thought. But when I became closer to him, I realized that he was immensely vulnerable. He was lonely. He had really, I was going to say sacrificed his life to his art, but for him it wasn't a sacrifice. It was the only possible way to be, because his art was his life. He was completely devoted to the art of ballet and to other art forms as well, but ballet was his life, and creating ballet for women.
But this is Turn It Around, Maria Tall Chief. danseuse concertante. We believe 1940s, possibly Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, with beautiful side detailing.
And we were having lunch, and we were working in the show, Song of Norway.
Oh.
That's right. The whole company was in it. And Maria said, who would you think what do you think if I married George? I said, George who? He said, George Balanchin. I said, Maria, my God, how'd you ever see him? How'd you ever get to know him? I go, because they worked together, but I'd never seen them, go out together or anything like this. But one time in California, I remember, she was invited to a party, and she asked me if I'd go. And I said, sure, I'll go. And then it turned out I couldn't. So I said, I can't go. She said, Vita, you've got to go. You've got to go. She said, all the wives are there. Tamara Jeva was there, and who else? Danilova, and who? Oh, Zarina. Zarina was there.
That's right.
And then Maria, and then Tanny. Now, was there someone else there? I don't remember. I think Zarina.
I don't know.
Yeah. He was very nice. He was very nice. He didn't just sleep with him, he married him. With Maria, he made Maria. I mean, he worked with her.
Yes,
and she had, she had this in her to dance. She had a real feel for it.
But they worked hard. I remember even at bar work when he gave class every day.
Oh, yeah.
He was with her all the time, and she paid attention,
right. Oh, yeah.
But he was there, and he was, subtle things.
And to become.
And she just blossomed.
Right.
But he was a lonely man. All the romances in his life, none of them had lasted. And he loved being with young people, especially if they were female.
Once Lincoln Kirstein, who brought him over to America, said to my husband, to a very strange why he came to every performance, and he said, marriage is togetherness alone. And all his girls left him, who he married. He didn't leave them, they left him. I think it must be hard to live as a genius. And I don't know, maybe they wanted, children. He didn't like his dancers to get married and get children, But he accepted, finally, my daughter, because he knew that I was first a dancer. I was 6 months pregnant on stage. And I came back, I never missed a season in 22 years. And then he knew that I was really first dancer. And he adored my daughter, and she became his godfather.
He was not the least bit happy when I got married, and particularly when Kent and I had our first child, our first son. Balanchin came over to our house. He walked back from the New York State Theater with me. He lived close to the theater, as did we in New York. And I asked him if he'd like to come and meet our son. And he came and leaned over the crib and just sniffed and said, well, not as bad as I expected. With his 5 wives and with any other women with whom we had personal relationships, you could never tell what happened, because they said he left them and he said they left him, or vice versa, and it was always a completely confused story. So I'm not sure. I think it's because his devotion really was to ballet. It was always more important than any woman in his life.
A costume created for the 1970 production of Firebird. This is the headpiece that she would have worn on the side. There we go. Which is just gorgeous. This is my favorite costume in the archive. Yeah. This is Midsummer's Night Dream, worn by Meryl Ashley as well as Patricia McBride. This is Act 2 Divertimento, Pas de Deux. So this is one of my favorites as well.
Painting that was created in 1984 that shows Balanchine working at the School of American Ballet with dancers. Standing on the right of Balanchine is Peter Martins, who is now the director of the school and the New York City Ballet.
Please, we appreciate it. Is there our guest from Georgia? This is Olga, the journalist.
Hello. You speak English? When I first met him in 1967 in Edinburgh, when the New York City Ballet was in Scotland, and Jacques d'Amboise, who was to do Apollo, who was big principal dancer here, and he hurt his knee or back or something. And 24 hours before premiere, there was no Apollo. And so Balanchine tried to find somebody who had done Apollo all over Europe. And all the people who had done it were not available because it was short notice. It was a day and a half. He found out that there was a young boy in Denmark who had just learned it. This was in August, and I had just learned it in June. And Balanchine heard about this, and he said, bring him over. So they put me on a plane. I arrived in Edinburgh, first time I met Balanchine, and he was very polite, and he said to me, and performance was the next day. And I was very eager to rehearse. And he said, no, you must be tired. You go to hotel and rest. And I said, Mr. Balanchine, it's a 1-hour flight from Copenhagen to Edinburgh. I'm not tired. It was like in the morning. And he said, you go and rest. Because he wanted to go to have lunch with Suzanne Farrell. That was the real reason. Then later that afternoon, we met, and he asked me to show Apollo. He said, I hear you learned it, never danced it. So I showed him Apollo, and he said, all wrong. And I was like this. And he took off his jacket, and he went like this. I show you Apollo. And he danced the solo, everything. Stomach, but he was good. And I couldn't believe it. It was very different from what I had learned. And it took like 2 hours. And then he went, go home. The next day, I danced it, and I remembered everything. And he came up to me after performance, and he said, thank you. And he said, you remembered everything. And he was very happy about that. But I think I was so young that that's why, you know, I was 21 years old.
Got a subscription to the New York City Ballet in 1960, and as soon as my sister and I were old enough, they started taking us to the ballet. I'd say I went for the first time when I was about 5. Didn't like it that much. And then when I was 9, I was watching a performance of Balanchin's Coppelia, and it clicked. I just thought what I was seeing on stage, the excitement, the euphoria, was perfect, and I wanted to be a part of that. So I asked my parents if I could study ballet. My mother didn't know what to do with a boy that wanted to study ballet, so she called the New York City Ballet and said, what can I do with my son, who's 9 years old and wants to study ballet? And they said, well, you're in luck. We have a school, and they're having auditions soon. So I went and I auditioned for the School of American Ballet, and that's how it all began. So he came to the class, and he chose 8 of us to be taken out and put in a private class. And Balanchin himself came to watch that class 5 or 6 times during the first year, talked about what he expected from us as dancers.
He's known to have made great choreography for women. I challenge that notion, because if you ask me right now, what choreographer in history, and I dare to say history, has created better roles than George Balanchin, I would say nobody. Balanchin.
This is actually another beautiful Corinthia original. This is original. It was worn by Peter Martins. It was made for George Balanchin's Chaconne. So this would have been probably late 70s, I think, mid-late 70s, before he retired.
Every role that I danced by Balanchin, and I'm talking over 100 ballets, probably, fantastic male roles, fantastic. He was a fantastic choreographer for men. But somehow legend has it it's women.
Of course he had to do ballets for women because there were no men. We didn't have a feeling in this country that being a professional ballet dancer was not only not appropriate, it was frowned upon and perhaps a source of amusement. And so when he started doing those ballets, like Serenade, there was 7 men and all these women, so he did what he had to do.
For the ballet Serenade, which is the first ballet that George Balanchin choreographed after he came to America, he made it for students at the School of American Ballet, and then it was performed by his company as he was trying to get a company started, and this is one of the early costume designs.
this, just do this. No, nothing, no step. Then here, and here, then open feet. Everything opens and then closing again. The simple things are the most, it can make me more than.
And so the whole profession in the last 40 years has changed enormously. And it was all because of Balanchine.
As I said earlier, I'm sure he drew from his own heritage. But he would say to me often, he would say, you know, this is pure petit pas. What I just did for you, petit pas. You know, he had tremendous respect for what came before him. But he loved the Georgian dancers, the men on the point. I remember he took me when we went to Tbilisi. He said to me, I want to show. And I had never seen anything like this in my life. Once we were in Paris, and he loved Paris. When the New York City Ballet was there, and he said to me, you know, see, if the French had offered me a job, you wouldn't be sitting here because you never would have known about me. I would have not been in America. Maybe you would have come to Paris, but you see, maybe not. But they didn't invite me, so I went to America with a big smile. The French didn't ask him, the British didn't want him, the Danes were smart enough to invite him for a year or two to Copenhagen to be director, but they didn't really want him. They wanted him to do Fokine and Massine. So, where was he going to go? So there was only one place left, America. And a vast open opportunity, and he grabbed it.
When we were in Cologne and had that dinner, there was a critic who was interviewing Balanchine, and it was shortly after Nureyev had come to the West, and the critic was young and somewhat arrogant and quite full of himself, said, well, Mr. Balanchine, who is the best male dancer in the entire world? Meaning, you don't have him in the New York City Ballet, he's at the Royal Ballet of Paris Opera. And Balanchine, straight-faced, looked at him and says, Fred Astaire.
Have you seen the well-to-do up and down Park Avenue on that famous thoroughfare with their noses in the air?
You know, New York City is very fast-paced here, and people walk very fast and go everywhere. There's subways. You know, I think he fell in love with that idea, and so the New York City Ballet became this sort of fast-paced company. I think that's what he was trying to take ballet further and further into the future. And as a teacher now here at his school, you know, we try to continue that and make things better and better and better into the future.
And so Balanchine captured the diversity of our country in dance, and the common denominator was physicality. And Americans love to be physical, you know, especially if it's expressed in the forms that Balanchine put before them. It's a real challenge, but it's a challenge that Americans really love, to get out there and do something that's hard and tricky and demanding and musical and expressive. And Balanchine and America met, fell in love, and produced this amazing phenomenon in our country with the establishment of the New York City Ballet. And remember, it was the first resident ballet company in America in 1949.
Primarily started teaching, and as he said, first a school and then a company, because he needed dancers that could move a certain way, so his ballets would look a certain way, his aesthetic. And the more he taught us from generation to generation, the more the technique developed and the skills improved. So we became very speedy, streamlined, high extensions, very slow control jumps, and very, very fast.
And so every time he would make a ballet that was pretty good, he'd give it to Boston, he'd give it to Pennsylvania, he'd give it to San Francisco. He'd let them do it for free to spread the word. And little by little, it took him 50 years. He had covered the landscape.
His way of moving was very straightforward, very fast, very direct, and there wasn't a lot of acting and frills and so on.
A simple movement like, before Balanchine came along, the pas de bourrée was a 1 and a 2 and a 3, and Balanchine made it 1, 2, 3. So it could be done in 1 count, whereas it had taken 3 counts before. But all of these little fine-tuning of techniques, I think those sensibilities are now shared around the world, and Balanchine's choreography has followed, and many companies are dancing Balanchine brilliantly today.
It was right after a rehearsal at the Old School of American Ballet. And I said, Mr. B, what happens when you hear music? Which I really wanted to know. And he looked at me kind of funny. And he answered almost right away, I see things. So I said, what sort of things? He said, oh, like some geometric patterns and things moving round, not like dancers, but designs, is the impression I got. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. I don't see things.
His musicality, the variety of the work that he produced, and the sense of inevitability in everything. The way the movement and the music are combined, that was his primary inspiration and focus. That's what makes them so great.
I think if there's a first identifying factor, it's sort of the marriage and the articulation of the music. Balanchine called himself a musician first. He always worked with the score in the studio. He often worked with the composer next to him. But that dissection and that visualization of a musical score, I think probably sets him apart. I think other people heard music, but Balanchine not only heard it, but he could conduct it, he could play it, he breathed it, he lived it. And I think he made it accessible, especially true with Stravinsky. I'm not sure Stravinsky's popularity would have been as widespread without the partnership with Balanchine. It's just this, it's like taking a black and white and adding the color.
So Stravinsky came and watched, and what he said afterwards, I did not know my music looks like this. And I felt, violin concerto, Stravinsky too, I felt my body was an instrument. I made music. I was violin, with all the steps given, visual. You can see, and I say to the singers in Liebeslieder, you have to dance with your voices. And I say to the dancers, you have to sing with your body.
Because Stravinsky's music appeal to him. Stravinsky's music did not really have, in its way, an emotional content, and Balanchine was somewhat like that. I think the idea of formalism and the fact that the notes express themselves, the movement expresses itself. In other words, there's no subtext. It's all about physical movement at that moment. It doesn't have a past, it doesn't have a future. I think that appealed to people.
1 and go.
So he would go sometimes and play with our pianist. You know, he'd say, "No, I want this," and he'd play. And you know, and then our pianist would say, "Oh, I see what you want that part."
You felt like a chess piece, placed with deliberation. Often, the only sound in the studio was a repeated phrase of music, or a murmured instruction to the pianist. That's kolya, in Russian, Moshna kolya.
His favorite pianist was Russian, Moshna, which means what, continue? Let's go? Something like that, yeah.
Moshna kolya. What is it? Moshna kolya. Please, go ahead.
And I asked him once when we had his political talks, I said, "So who are you voting for this time, Mr. Balanchin?" It was in, I forget what year it was, but it was when there was Kennedy and Nixon. And he said, "I vote for Nixon." And I was surprised. And I said, "Really, why?" He said, "Because he gives money to the arts." That's why.
I was in the company from 1957 to 61. We felt we were very unknown. And I think it was only Lincoln Center in 64 and Dance in America television series, 1970, that somehow brought his name to the attention of the general public. Around 1960, the Ford Foundation gave a lot of money to dance, the first big grant to dance in America. And they chose Balanchine and Balanchine's technique, Balanchine's way of teaching as their sort of central point. And they chose Balanchine as their sort of master teacher.
But no, I think Mr. Balanchin was very much like a chameleon. He could do anything, you know. He could do ballet in any style. He was never, this is partly why he was so great as a choreographer. He never tried to imbue him deliberately. It happened naturally, obviously. He could do romantic ballet, modern ballet, classical ballet, and it was unmistakably Balanchine, and yet they were so different.
Pushkin, Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, Mozart, they were with him all the time. But generally, he was in the present, and he didn't like to talk about the future. He didn't like to think about when he wouldn't be there, like most of us. But he said, someday the dancers will remember the steps, but they will have forgotten the ideas. So I felt that that was my job, to remember the ideas.
But America was really given a great gift with Balanchine. It wasn't just the New York City Ballet, it wasn't just his ballets, but it established the art form of ballet in America in a professional sense that hadn't existed before.